welcome back to Dukascopy TV. You've joined us for another session of Hollenbeck Unleashed, and Dr. Frank is joining me in the studio once again. Dr. Frank, welcome back.
Hello.
Dr. Frank, for 15 years, Ben Bernanke argued that there should be an inflation target set by the central banks. And in January, he got his way of a 2% inflation target set by the US. Is this a positive thing?
Well, for me, if you don't learn from the past, you're bound to repeat it. For me, it's the implicit inflation target that led to the excessive monetary growth that ultimately led to the crash of 1929, the housing bubble, and the crash of 2008. And there are two problems with inflation targeting. The first one is that if you have a growing economy or a rapidly growing economy, you should actually anticipate prices to drop. And for the last 25 years, we've had the industrialization of India and China, which has put a lot more goods and services onto the market, and we should actually have seen prices falling. The fact that prices were stable probably indicated that the monetary policy was too loose. The second problem we have is that we're looking at the wrong prices. The quantity theory you see in macroeconomic textbooks is called the Cambridge equation, a pure Keynesian creation. And this equation you're probably familiar with. It's M times V is equal to P times Y, where Y is real income and P is the GDP deflator, or the CPI. Hence, monetary policy has defined inflation as a CPI. However, the original quantity theory of money was actually M times V is equal to P times Q. And in this equation, money can be spent on anything. In other words, prices are on anything that money can be spent on. So in other words, it's not just what makes up the CPI, which is consumer prices. It includes things such as housing, bonds, gold, anything that money can be spent on. So by focusing on the CPI instead of looking at all prices, we basically had the central bank looking at a tree that was fine while the forest around the tree was burning. And to a large degree, we may be making the same mistake today. In other words, you had someone come in on Monday and talk about the fact that the S&P 500 has increased 20% over the last 4 years. When we look at what's happening to gold prices, when we look at what's happening to bond prices, we may be making the same mistake we made just less than 10 years ago. Remember that the Fed chairman said that we did not have a housing bubble in 2007.
So, Dr. Frank, do you see any additional problems with setting an inflation target at 2%?
Well, for me, this shows that macroeconomics is totally detached from microeconomic theory. Let me give you a very simple example. Suppose that with a short run, so that we have no output effects. And suppose that we have 10 apples and 10 oranges and $20. And suppose that the price of oranges is $1.20 and that the price of apples is 80 cents. Now, suppose that all of a sudden society wants more apples than oranges. Then what will happen is the price of apples will go up. Let's say it goes from 80 cents to $1. And let's say that the price of oranges drop from $1.20 to $1. Okay, so in this example, we have a 25% increase in the price of apples, and we have a 17% drop in the price of oranges. Now, if we consider inflation to be the average increase or decrease, we end up with inflation. Obviously, I could have set different numbers and we would have had deflation instead of inflation. So here's my question. Should we have the government come in and reduce the money supply so that the price of apples drop and the price of oranges drop, so that we make sure that we have an average price of 2%?
Yeah, it seems pointless.
Yeah, it's totally silly. But that's the type of monetary policy that we're currently following when we set an inflation target. For me, money needs to be a stable unit of account. Money needs to be a stable measure of value, just like the length of a meter needs to be stable for you to be able to make any type of future decisions.
Finally, Dr. Frank, we've got our last question for you, but it doesn't come from me, it comes from another one of our guests, so let's take a listen.
Professor Hollenbeck, what do you think monetary policies should be?
Well, if you have an inflation target of 2%, it means that the central bank will be printing money continuously. Now, 2% might not seem like a lot, but 2% over 25 years means that the value of the money in your pocket will be cut in half. That is a massive transfer of wealth to the early recipients of the money, which is governments and the banking sector, from the late recipients of the money, which is the wage earners and the poor. For me, central bank is legal counterfeiting. And just like we should put counterfeiters in jail, I think we should put an end to the central bank.
Well, let's see if Leslie has the same opinion.
Well, I think we're seeing probably the limits that our monetary system can offer to us, because basically it's somehow a monetary system is a Ponzi scheme built around debt, and as any other Ponzi scheme, it has its limits. So I would rather defend the implementation of some kind of hard commodity-based money system and give back to the market the control on interest rates, rather than making the authorities and policymakers run the show.
Wow, I didn't realize I had a twin.
Very, very similar to your opinion, Frank. Well,
Yes.
Dr. Frank, thank you so much for coming into the studio and talking to us once again.
You're welcome.
That's all we have time for from here in the Dukascopy studio, but make sure you click back to the website for more interviews and updates.